So the first major thing is that the major problem in the world is there's too many humans. People don't like to talk about that. So you go to meetings and they BS all along about, oh, this is a big problem and this is a big problem. But really what it boils down to is there's too many humans. Okay? So if we all agree on that, then a lot of us don't have to worry about that. But there's people in this room who can make a difference in the future. But I really mean that. You know, we live in Boulder. We're just, you know, the little bubble. I love it here, but you know, if you travel around the world, you know, there's just too many of us competing with non-humans for a very limited space. So I think that, you know, that's something that it's a given, and we need to do something with that. It may not be where you and I work, but we need to do something about that. If I had a few beers under me, I'd tell you what I think we should do. But I do have some jokes in my book about that. So that's one problem. The other real problem is that people are really disconnected from the world. And once again, you know this, but it's a major problem being alienated from Earth. I mean, you know, some people, they're alienated from themselves, they're alienated from other people, they're alienated from other animals, they're alienated from the planet. So how do you reconnect them? Okay, that's kind of, you know, these are big questions. They're not rhetorical. I'll try to say something on that. The other big thing, and I'll weave this in when I talk a bit about compassionate conservation, is that individual animals count. So for compassionate conservation, the bumper sticker is something like, first, do no harm. And then the second is that the lives of every individual counts. Okay. So I'm writing a book about freedom in animals, and I was talking with Jessica Pierce, my co-author on this. We wrote a book called Wild Justice, and what came to me today, I live off of stickums and little notes, which is bad. But what came to me today is that in all walks of life, no matter whether we're interacting with other people, with other animals, with ourselves, with an object, there are trade-offs. I mean, that's what, to me, my big thing came today, that we're trading things off against one another. You know, you decide to go to this movie versus that movie. You decide to go somewhere versus somewhere else, wear something. But I really mean that. And so what happens in conservation is that these trade-offs result in some animals being killed. So in our book, we have a progression of freedom. We start talking about factory farmed animals, and the last chapter that we're working on now is wild animals. So we're trading off the life, say, of a cow for a meal, the life of a mouse or a rabbit for a drug, the life of an elephant in a circus to entertain ourselves, dogs, most of whom have horrible lives. I mean, people who have studied this know, I mean, you know, you have dogs who have great lives, but many dogs have really horrible lives. About 75% are really on their own in the world. So we're working in degrees of freedom. And then we're trading off wild animals, captive for wild. So for example, one project that I really fought was killing hamsters to save black-footed ferrets. So conservation biologists will often play what's called the numbers game. They'll say, well, we have tons of hamsters. So maybe you didn't know this, but up in Wellington, Colorado, just north of Fort Collins, is a center where they were working on black-footed ferret reintroduction. So black-footed ferrets are endangered animals, okay? The last one was taken in the 80s or 90s, I think in Meeteetse, Wyoming, actually. So they want to reintroduce black-footed ferrets who are predators, and in order for them to kill animals and be predators, they have to practice. So what they do is they raise golden hamsters merely to be practice prey. Some people think that's just fine. Some people don't. But that would be an example of a trade-off. And when I say that conservation biologists play the numbers game is, well, there's tons of golden hamsters. You can breed them. Oh, that's my phone. That's okay. Don't worry about it. This could be the first call I got all year. I never shut it off. But they'll say, well, there's tons of golden hamsters, but there's very few black-footed ferrets. Okay, so that would be an example of trading off an endangered, a non-endangered, if you will, animal for saving an endangered species. Okay, up at the center up there, they've raised tens of thousands of hamsters. Their sole purpose is for black-footed ferrets to practice killing them. And naive black-footed ferrets are not very good predators. So there's a lot of harm. Okay, the bottom line is there's a lot of pain and suffering of the hamsters. So when I raised that issue, it was probably 15 years ago, a friend of mine, I'm not a night person, and so she dragged me down to a meeting in Denver on the reintroduction of the black-footed ferrets. And that could have been one of the major errors of my life. Number one, agreeing to go out after dark. And number two, going to this black-footed ferret meeting where I learned that the black-footed ferret reintroduction program was just, something that someone dreamed up with good intentions, if you will. Okay, so that's one example. Another example would be trading off members of the same species. So this is a project that's dear to your heart. I actually did some work on it, and I had some students studying coyotes in the Lamar Valley in Yellowstone. And his project ended when the wolves were reintroduced, because the wolves basically killed 90% of the coyotes and decimated the 6 packs of coyotes, the resident packs, in the Lamar Valley. So there, once again, was a trade-off of wild animals. People say, well, no, not really. Well, no, it is. The decision was made, whether you agree or not, to reintroduce wolves, and they killed coyotes. So I raised the issue whether that was ethical. I think you need to ask these questions. And somebody said, well, yeah. And I said, well, then you're valuing wolves over coyotes. And they went, no, we're not. This was some people from Fish and Wildlife Service, so you wouldn't expect that they would have that. Anybody here? No. I don't really care. I mean, I've had discussions with them that really leave me floored in terms of their lack of sophistication in thinking. But it is. You're valuing wolves over coyotes, and that's fine, but you need to know what you're doing. Like you're valuing black-footed ferrets over hamsters. You're trading off, okay? So I went to a meeting, because I did some work and I did some consulting on the reintroduction of the wolves. I know Doug Smith really well. I know a lot of the people who work up there. I really like them. I love the project. But it's not without its flaws, and one flaw is some wolves were traded off so that other wolves could live. Wolves were kidnapped. They were taken from ecosystems with no knowledge of what happened in the ecosystem from which they were taken. So we all know that when a key member of a wolf pack dies, it can have negative effects on the wolf pack. Once again, it's not meant to say it shouldn't have been done. What it's really meant to say is that in the zeal to get wolves into Yellowstone, other wolves suffered. Okay, so that would be an example, once again, of a trade-off. So compassionate conservation would argue, and there's different shades of gray within that growing movement. Some would argue that we shouldn't be doing those trade-offs. That's it, do no harm. You just can't do them. Some would say, well, we need to minimize the numbers of animals who basically are being killed. Biologists like to say sacrificed or euthanized, but the bottom line is they're being killed, let's just face it. There's no such thing, you're not euthanizing a wild animal unless he or she is ill. So when they go out and they say, well, we euthanize some animals, no, euthanization is mercy killing. They're murdering the animals. I use that word, and they get very upset because they say, well, murder is, only when humans are the victims. But why is that so if you're killing sentient animals who care about their being alive? Okay, it's like zoos will say we euthanized an animal. No, I call it zoothanized. They're not euthanizing an animal. They kill otherwise healthy animals to make more room for other healthy animals who they will then subsequently kill. So really they're killing the animals or zoothanizing them they're not euthanizing them. And I stress that because conservation biologists like to sanitize their language by saying we euthanized. Oh, we had to sacrifice these animals. Well, you killed them. So I think part of the discussion is, in a nice way, and I do this in a nice way, I really mean it, is to tell them or explain to them what they're really doing, or at least have them admit what they're really doing. And I think that that's really important. So one question that comes up to me, and people ask me this all the time, because I know the people at Wildearth Guardians, and a lot of you know Wendy Keefe-Overing, who used to work there, now she works for the HSU. I just had beers with her, and we were talking about this. Like, some people go, they'll say to me, what do you think about having wolves in Colorado? And I'm not sure. I'd love to have them here. I mean, I would love to have them here, but I don't want them here if they're going to be killed. And the rewilding notion is getting people to become enchanted with nature, reattached to nature, to undo the alienation. So I always say that it's okay, bring wolves back, but look what's happening in Idaho and Montana and Wyoming. You all know this, so I don't have to go into it. You all know what's happening. So to me, the basic thing is changing the attitudes of the people. So when I talk about personal rewilding, I talk about sort of rewilding from the heart, reconnecting, accepting the fact that non-human animals, other animals, have a right to live as well. I don't mean that in an animal rights kind of way. It's just they're sentient beings who have a right to live. They have a right to be free. I mean, I know that we're dreaming here right now, but those are where that's the area where I think we really need to concentrate, so that people will basically, accept the fact that other animals and their homes should be free to exist. If you don't like the word rights entails a lot of baggage. So then people will take an argument of looking at trade-offs in terms of an animal welfare paradigm. So animal welfare is really, when it cashes out 99% of the time, it's the benefits to humans and the cost to the animals. And since it's I'm using animals and humans, but we're animals. I don't like to have to say that all the time. But so we do the calculus, and we conclude that invariably my colleagues, researchers, when they do something, are saying, they're either saying it explicitly or they're implying that the costs to the animals are less than the benefits to the humans outweigh the cost to the animals. That's a welfare argument, okay? And once again, believe me, I've been doing this for a long time. You can cash that out very easily. You can make up stories about how the benefits to the humans outweigh the costs. You can conclude that the animals aren't sentient beings, that they don't feel pain, they don't suffer. People used to do this. It's just very recently where there's been much more acceptance about the emotional lives of non-human animals, of course, including wolves and other sentient beings. So one of the things that Jessica and I are arguing, and it really bears on wildlife, and is that welfare arguments just don't work, although you hear them all the time, because you can always cash them out so that you're trumping the interests of the animals, the non-human animals, and favoring the humans. You can always do that. It's so clear that the arguments that people make about killing wolves when they leave a park. Wolves are predators. It's not rocket science that they're going to kill an occasional cow. I worked with coyotes for years, and people would say, oh yeah, the coyotes are decimating, livestock populations. Well, no, they're not. But that's the argument, people would make, so that it would be okay to kill coyotes, because basically they're lessening profits. It all comes down to money, let's face it that way, okay? So the welfare arguments just don't work. And people get very uneasy about that, because if those don't work, then what kind of decisions are we going to make, right? So the compassionate conservation argument would mean that we have to make other decisions that do not involve killing animals. So some of the examples that are being thrown around today, just literally today, is trading off cormorant birds for salmon. While experts will tell you that killing the cormorants won't save the salmon, some people think that it will. Barred owls for snowy owls, killing barred owls so that snowy owls can live, but people will tell you that that might not work. And what really it blew my mind was a colleague of mine who would bristle at the thought of harming a wolf. He actually he wrote on some wolf ethics, concluded that it would be okay to do an experiment where you would experimentally kill 3,000 barred owls to save snowy owls. Killing's not an experiment. I mean, it is in a sense, but it's not. It's not like you can kill them and then when you discover that killing one owl to save another owl didn't work, that you can go poof and they would come back. But the reason I'm using that is not to criticize him, but rather to say we live in a very complicated world. I mean, we live in a really, really challenging world where there are too many of us. We're destroying habitat left and right. We don't preserve habitat. People go, well, let's just put this land aside until we have sustainable populations of this or that species, right? Developers, you live in Boulder? Not a square inch goes undeveloped. So when you have these beautiful, magnificent landscapes that people say, well, let's just save them because we're going to reintroduce wolves or some other species to them in 40 years. And all you hear is the cash register going. Are you kidding me? I can build 80 homes or 40,000 condominium units. Okay? Once again, it's a trade-off. Okay, so to me the key question is how do we sensitize people to not only the plight of other animals, because when we influence other animals, we influence ourselves. There's enough research going on right now that says that we suffer the indignities to which we expose other animals. You don't know that sometimes, but we do. So many people are really alienated from the world, and they're alienated from themselves. And there was this really great essay, you can find it online. There's he's an ecological writer. I think he's trained in ecology, named George Monbiot. He wrote a really, really good book on rewilding. His book is called Feral, and he wrote about rewilding, and our books came out at about the same time, and we're pondering doing something together, but neither of us wants to do any more. No, I'm serious. I said, do you want to do this? He went, no. Do you want to do it? No. But he wrote a paper called The Age of Loneliness is Killing Us. It was in the Guardian newspaper last October. And what he basically is arguing is that we get lonely when we alienate ourselves from nature. And so people, a lot of people shake their head and they go, oh yeah, of course. But it's true. I mean, if I'm just having a tough day, I'll go take a walk, or I'll watch some ravens or some ants, or I don't care. I like flowers, so I'll watch some flowers. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be a sentient live animal. But what do? A lot of times just go, I'm done, I need to take a walk. Well, what'd you do last weekend? I had a great time, I took a hike. I took my dog on a hike. I mean, whoever the animal is, doesn't really matter, and sometimes it doesn't have to be an animal. But this article, you should look it up. It's just called The Age of Loneliness is Killing Us. It's really compelling. And there's a branch of psychology called conservation psychology, and they do a lot of work on how humans form attitudes and beliefs, because you have to know how they're formed before you can really work on them, especially when they dissolve. How do you rekindle or rewild people so that they have attitudes and beliefs that favor other animals and their homes. So I really recommend that. You can yell out questions, because I can babble to keep myself up. Like I said, I'm not a night person.
I was just going to
yeah.
bring up, of course, we
Oh, yeah.
They didn't feel, they barely thought. It was all to justify what we did to them, or we as a nation, we as a people, whenever we want to justify what we do, we negate any intelligence or feeling of the victims that we're imposing upon. I mean, it's
Yes.
our way of rationalizing and making it bearable for us to do these unbearable things, to say that they don't feel anyway, they don't, and I mean, that's a psychology that's kind of interesting too.
Right.
We impose more and more harm just to save our own sense of what is right or bearable. And it's a really strange way of rationalizing things. But yeah, now we do it, well, they're still slaves, and there's still people that are treated that way, and then animals are the next victims.
They're the easiest,
Yes.
if you will.
Because they can't talk back, and because they don't talk, people
Sure.
assume that means they don't. And the word dumb
I
really
know.
means that they can't speak, but in our language it means something that's stupid.
Yeah, I think the Dumb Friends League does good things, but I would change the name.
Yeah.
I've had discussions with them.
Why don't we educate the people to what dumb actually means?
Well, it's hard to educate dumb people in the way we use the word dumb. No, don't get me going on that. No, seriously.
One thing I've noticed
Yeah.
that I run into over and over and over again, especially with the wolf reintroduction thing and protection thing, is there's so much misinformation out there, and people use that information accompanied with anecdotes, and they believe it's fact, and they spread it, and people gobble it up.
Right.
And if you do present actual scientific facts to these people that are spreading that misinformation, you can tell you're getting somewhere when they start calling you names.
Yeah.
The anger level goes up, the
Yeah.
calling starts, because they have no argument to counter what you're presenting to them.
Yeah.
However, that's when you come to an impasse. That's why I think a lot of the people that have their minds made up, you can talk to them, but chances are they're not going to listen. It's the people that are on the fence, and it's the children.
Yeah, I was going to talk later about kids. Kids are where it's at.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right about misinformation, about wolves, about all, lots of different animals. I mean, what you're saying. I mean, times are changing a bit. So even, I edited a book called The Smile of a Dolphin about 15 years ago, and it's all about animal emotions. And there's 50 some odd stories that scientists wrote, because they couldn't publish these stories in any scientific place because their researchers would laugh at them. So when we started doing this book, we were wondering whether we would get enough stories, and it turned out that I had to turn people down because that many scientists said, I've got all these great stories, but I can't publish them anywhere. I won't get tenure, I won't get my grant, and stuff like that. And the reason I'm saying that is that kind of opened the door for scientists to come out. It really did. Really well-known scientists. I mean, Jane Goodall, George Howell, really well-known people wrote stories and stuff, and we were thrilled. And we were thrilled that at the end we just had to turn down some stories because the book was filled. So times are changing. I mean, one of the things that's not happening fast enough, particularly in the United States, I do a lot of work in Europe, and the EU is really far advanced in terms of animal welfare, animal care, is we don't factor in what we know about animals into legislation for protection. So for example, we know mice display empathy, rats display empathy, they like to be tickled, they laugh, and just last week it was discovered that they actually dream about what look to be future events. We've known for years that rats in a maze will dream about the maze they ran that day, and that's how memory is consolidated in humans. So for example, colleagues will say, well, show us the data, and we'll say, well, there are the data. So it's been 11 years since we've known that mice display empathy, and mice are not protected by the Animal Welfare Act. Neither are rats. So I'm a real pain in the butt to people because I always say that we should just stop research today on rats, and you need to incorporate in what we know, okay? The same goes into conservation. I used to, now I mean, people sort of take a second glance, but I used to talk about like the wolf's perspective. Wolves have a point of view, and so do bears and mice and cats and chickens and fish. They have a point of view about the world. They all want to live in peace and safety. They do. And you know, when people say, well, we don't really know what other animals need and want. Well, we may not know the details, but we know they want to live in peace and safety. We know that. Even in the, quote, lowest organisms, you see violent reactions to danger and stress. They don't like being stressed, at whatever stress means for them. You see the same shades of gray of stress in humans. What stresses me may not stress you, or vice versa. So times are changing a bit in terms of what we're learning and how we apply what we know about animal emotions. But this came up, for example, in December, there was a study published in which 870 wolves were killed in Alberta to save threatened rangeland caribou. It was an experiment. It didn't work. It didn't have any, the killing had no effect on the survival of the rangeland caribou, for example. It was all driven by oil and business. I mean, let's just face it. It was all driven by money. So I wrote a lot of articles about that, shaming, if you will, the scientists who did it. It should never have been done. I'm going to talk about this because I'm giving a talk in Vancouver, in Canada, in the end of July. That's a study that really needs to be aired. That a lot of people don't know about that study who love wolves. They trapped them, they shot them, they strychnine poisoned them. They also killed about 400 animals. They call it, I call it collateral damage. We hit some non-target. Because scientists like to BS and use all the words, that we hit some non-target species. Dogs. Wildlife Services is another group. I call them Murder Incorporated. I'm very proud that when I use that term, people actually use it. That's all they do, is they go around kill animals. They kill dogs, they kill cats, they harm people, and they kill so many endangered species. You never read about it. They also have airplane crashes. This is something Wildearth Guardians, I know, has written about a lot on their website. And there was just a crash a month ago where two shooters were killed chasing coyotes, this high off the ground. And I actually think that's a tragedy. I mean, some of the comments that came into my essay were an eye for an eye, and I can understand that. But it's a tragedy that human lives were taken in that way. It was a tragedy that the human lives were taken. It's not good, killing it, and dying isn't good, and stuff. But times are changing a bit, and that's one of the arguments that I think that y'all can really use when you talk to people, is to educate them that these animals actually have feelings. Wolf mothers are really good mothers, as are the mothers of lots of different species. The other big move that's happening is people are using positive messages rather than negative messages. So instead of showing elephants who are slaughtered, they're showing elephant mothers with their young. I mean, it has a big effect. There's actually been some studies showing that I can't look at not only can't I don't look at videos anymore. I get asked all the time, would you like to analyze this video of a cow on a factory farm? Do you think she's suffering? Do you think I would fall if I jumped off the roof rather than flew? Of course she's suffering. You think this monkey with 7 electrodes in their brain is suffering. Of course they're suffering. So people are really changing, and there's some really, a guy named Steve Ross is doing some really nice work showing positive images. You want to attract people's attention. You don't want them to go like this. My friends go, I don't want to look at it anymore. But you show them a mother elephant and a baby, or a chimpanzee mother and her baby, or something that really is a warm image. Then you start talking to them. So these images of wolves, the horrific ones on the web, the psychos who use them for target practice. I mean, these people are really sick. I mean, they are really sickies. People try to justify what they do, or their friends try to justify them, but they're sick people. You know, you probably wouldn't want to get in an elevator with them. At least I wouldn't. You could, but I wouldn't. But that's the other thing, is like trying to understand what drives them. You know, like on the one hand, trying to understand what drives people to reconnect or connect and become enchanted with nature. And the other is what forces people. And part of it is they think of animals as non-feeling beings. So fish now, we know fish are showing the most amazing behaviors. There's fish who actually indicate to other fish where food is by nodding their head. And we call that referential communication. If I want to show you something, I might go like this or point. It was first thought that only humans did it. And then they discovered chimpanzees do it. And now we discover fish do it. Just so for example, fish form packs that are quite coordinated for hunting that resemble wolf packs. So the message that's happening now is that sentience and really highly developed cognitive capacities are really quite widely distributed among non-human animals.
It used to be that everything was attributed to instinct.
Yes.
Instinct is this magical thing but it really involves some intelligence and learning and all that kind of thing among the animals.
Right.
Predicting future.
Right, predicting future events. Like birds are very good at predicting future food resources. They can assess food and decide how much they should eat at a given time so that they have some food left in the future. I was looking for potato chips yesterday, and I opened my cupboard and there weren't none. No, seriously. It was like, are you kidding me? No, seriously, how many times have you gone to a cupboard and you've been looking for something and you go, oh yeah, I ate it maybe even just yesterday. Birds are really good at predicting future resources. Non-human animals have to be able to do that, especially frugivores, or animals who eat seasonal fruit. There's some really neat research being done now that shows that they are really good at predicting environmental changes. You know, if you're a predator, there's going to be animals around usually, unless hunters have killed them. But frugivores who are depending on seasonal blossoms of fruit have to be really good about what's coming when. And they're far better than I would be of making a checklist, thinking, oh yeah, we're going to run out of peaches next week. I ought to buy some. Because you go to the store and you ask for peaches and they go, well, we ran out. or they're not in bloom anymore. But anyway, that's really changing, and it's important information for you all to use. I really do, is to put out the fact that animals care about what happens to themselves and their families. They display empathy, for example. So what's happening is when these animals suffer, they're not only suffering their own harms, they're suffering harms to other animals around. So for example, when elephants, I don't know, anybody been to Kenya? In Nairobi, there's the David Sheldrick Elephant Rehabilitation Center. So I've been there and I met some elephants there. So these are traumatized 2-year-old elephants on average who saw, heard, and smelled their families being killed. It's not only seeing. In fact, the seeing may be the least of the potent stimuli. The most salient might be the smelling and the hearing. Okay, so mice and rats and labs, for example, are not only suffering their own harm, they're suffering that of other mice. There was a study published a couple of months ago that showed that mice can actually read the pain in the face of other mice. That's not astounding. I mean, I'm not very good at reading facial expressions in mice, but if I was a mouse, I bet I'd be pretty damn good at doing it. Yeah. You know, so these are not. This is what happens when the door is open to research. Cows, their eyes, their nose temperature, and their ear positions are very good indicators of their well-being, how they're feeling about life, if you will. So when people say we don't know how they feel, well, I always say, would you do it to your dog? Would you put a bolt in the head of your dog? Would you trap your dog? Well, no, I mean, that's the point. People go, oh, God, no. And I go, well, you know, I work in China a lot. In fact, the book over there at Jasper is about some bear rescue I do there with this Animals Asia group. And people will go, oh, you know, you come from the United States, you know, no, sorry, people say to me, "Oh, you go to China, they eat cats and dogs there," and I go, "Well, yeah, I just came from America where they eat pigs and goats and cows. What's the difference? They're all sentient mammals. I guarantee you that dogs don't feel any more or less pain than cows or sheep or goats." So I just think that we need to be consistent across the board. And I think what's happening now is science is showing that we've been consciously and intentionally very nasty to other animals. I mean, and to other humans. The other thing I'd like to say, and interrupt me. I'm practicing my talk for this meeting in a month. No, I'm only kidding. I decided I'm not doing any more PowerPoints. I'm calling it Death by PowerPoint. You go in and you see PowerPoints and you see all this stuff flying in and out of the screens, and it's like you're getting high on PowerPoints, and too much information is coming. So I decided I'm allowed to read some notes. Yeah.
So I think that you started out talking about these two rules: the do no harm and every life matters.
Yeah.
And then you went on to talk about the trade-offs, and that seemed like that was based on two other rules, like ecosystem matters more than individuals, and populations work better than, or more important than, and the numbers game. Those sound like there are two others. And then these people were talking about other sets of rules, like animals don't have feelings.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like that there's these fundamental rules that people are operating under.
Uh-huh.
And if we weren't going to make any really substantial changes, it's changing those fundamental rules rather than showing facts or things like that. And I think that when you talked about showing mommy elephants with the babies, or comparing the cows to the dogs, to your own dog, those are the kinds of arguments that changed those.
Yes.
So I'm thinking that's probably why those techniques are more effective.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, yeah, exactly. I think first of all, what you need to do, I was going to say that many of the people who would be on the other side of where we are sometimes not the brightest bulb on the block. But some of my colleagues would be on the other side, and well, they may not be the brightest bulbs on the block either. But you're right. I think it's using down-home examples like the dog, or positive imagery, right?
So you sort of talked about the nastiness or the sort of the ill intent, and I'm not sure if that's appropriate as much as that they're just following a different value system, and they're acting consistently with their value system.
Oh, sure.
Different than ours.
Yeah, I mean, I agree everything you're saying, and I think what needs to be done is you need to change their values. Exactly. But sometimes what you also need to do is be very explicit with them in terms of the trade-offs they're making. They just don't see them sometimes. I mean, they really don't. I mean, I've talked to ranchers when we studied coyotes years ago, and just have a down-home conversation with them. And sometimes they'll go, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that." And sometimes I hadn't thought about that. I mean, the thing what I like about the compassionate conservation movement very much is that it factors humans into the equation. You're not going to get anywhere in this world by not factoring humans in. You're not. So, you meet a Maasai who owns a cow and a goat, and an elephant kills the cow and he kills the elephant. Well, I don't like either of those things, but I can certainly understand where he's coming from. I mean, you just took half of his resources. How would you like if somebody came into your house tonight and took half of what you have? So I really like it because it spans cultures, and it takes into account, human stakeholders. Of course, taking into account human stakeholders also makes it much more complex, but that's the world we live in. It really is. And so one of the places I come from, and I get grief every now and again from people, and I just have to deal with it, is I would like the world to be a certain way. I mean, I would like the world to be vegan. I would like the world to just honor other animals. I would like the world to do this and that and the other thing. I would like there not to be circuses. I'd like blah, 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 blah. But there's a real world out there. So my attitude is, while we work to get rid of certain practices or change practices, we do the best we can as we're working. But the goal is always to get rid of them. So a lot of you might know Temple Grandin up in CSU. And I don't get along with her, but I'll respect some of the things she does. So people will say, is she helping animals? Well, I think she's probably helping 1/1,000,000th of 1% of all cows on factory farms. So there are some lucky few who may be, quote, helped. But their good life is not a good life. They're still being tortured and they're still being killed for food. The one thing I wish Temple Grandin would do, and I've said that to her because I've given back-to-back talks with her, I wish that as she's doing this work, she would work to stop factory farms, and she's not. So I think that we need to get people's value systems changed, working within the existing system with an eye to the future. I mean, I think that's the best we can do.
But
yeah.
with that Temple Grandin, I mean, as you mentioned, people, I mean, I'm vegetarian, I haven't gone the vegan route yet. I've been vegetarian for 35 years. But as you say, I mean, there's going to be people all the time who are going to say, there's going to be meat,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which comes from animals.
Mhm.
Temple Grandin at least has made attempts to make slaughter at least bearable for the animals. You know,
Well,
she
more
understands-
humane, not
more
bearable.
humane, more humane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not bearable because they're dead afterwards anyway. But but that's the viewpoint she has.
Mhm.
She has greatly relieved the suffering of a lot of animals who were going to be killed anyway, and at least they were killed more humanely.
Mhm.
It's not up to Temple Grandin, I don't believe, to change people's minds that they shouldn't be eating meat altogether.
I think it is. She's a rock star. She is. I think it is up to Temple Grandin to do that, and I've said that to her. I do. I think it is up to her. I mean, she may disagree. She obviously does.
Yeah.
But
I disagree.
but I think because I think we look to leaders. We do. We look to people.
I know, but she's considered a leader because she's working within a framework that people will listen to. As soon as she said, let's stop killing cows altogether, only a few people would actually be listening to her.
I don't know. I mean, you're raising a good point. I don't think that she's helping. I mean, I think if you look at the numbers, she's not helping all that many animals. I mean, she's not. I mean, I think on her own admission, you know, with these humane shoots, I mean, these animals are still stressed. I mean, they do.
Yeah.
They are. They're less stressed.
Yeah.
That's why it's a welfare issue. No, I agree. I mean, sometimes people get really pissed at me because I'll say that she is making the life of some animals better. But that's like comparing gas mileage in a Rolls Royce and a Cadillac. You know, the Cadillac may get better mileage than the Rolls Royce, but it ain't good mileage. So Joe the cow may have a, quote, better life than Mary, but Joe's life is pretty crappy, even though he's going down some
I know, I
humane
mean,
shoot.
That would have to, you'd have to have people stop eating meat altogether.
Right. But there's people in the zoo, and I mean, I can tell you right now, because I was at a really big meeting in last November. It's called PAWS, the Performing Animal Welfare Society. There's people there who are high zoo administrators who will openly tell you they look forward to the day when there are no more zoos. They will tell you that. I mean, I have friends who'll tell you that right out in meetings. They'll say, I'm looking forward to the time when I'm not employed. And that's what I mean by that goal. But anyway, all I'm saying is that I think there are people out there who could do more. They may disagree. That's fine. I mean, they have a right to disagree. The point I'm trying to make, and I think your point substantiates it or instantiates it, is we are a very complex mammal as human beings. And for changing values, and not only changing but living them, walking the talk, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So you don't even have to worry about meal plans. You can look at what's happening in conservation. So are things getting better? Conservation has an incredibly bloody history. Any conservation will tell you. I work in Australia. Wildlife conservation is killing. Just go kill the animals. Kangaroos, whoever, invasive species, just kill them. Kill them in the most inhumane ways, by the way, too. And so what I'm saying is that the change in value would be having people understand that these animals are important as sentient beings. And when that fails, show that they're important to human health. That is a more compelling argument because we're so humanocentric. Or that they're important to ecosystems. A new book came out called The New Wild. It was just published last month by a guy named Fred Pierce. It's about the biological importance of invasive species. And it's a point I and other people have been making, that invasive species change ecosystems. And he writes, beautifully about how, so you start killing these invasive species, you're decimating ecosystems into which they've become an integral part. Okay, and stuff. So the point I'm trying to make is it's really complex. The wolf issues, to me, they're complex, but they're simple compared to just a lot of else, that's going on. Let me just make a few more points, and maybe we can get some more. This is great. I'm taking notes because I'm a prolific note taker, and if I use anything you said, I will cite you. No, I promise I will. I write down everything. Let me just see.
You were also mentioning about Europe being ahead of us, and I've heard that several times before. The one thing that bothers me is that Europe has already taken up most of their land and, turned it into
Right.
towns and cities, whereas at least the United States or America has a lot of open space, which I wish we would do something different with. But the reality is we have some species still roaming that Europe doesn't
Right, I'm not
have.
talking about historically. Right now, though, European regulations are far more advanced than ours in terms of animal welfare, animal protection legislation. No, I agree with you. When people, travel, and they see Moab or they see the Rocky Mountains or the Grand Canyon, it's like they think they're on another planet.
Right.
No, you're right.
And even Africa, where there's a lot of decimation of the animals too, but at least they have huge herds of wildebeest. They have, we can criticize all we want about Africa and things that go on there, but at least they have wild populations that other places don't even have. They can act
Oh, I agree.
mighty about it, but
Yeah.
they don't even have those.
No, we have to be very careful when we criticize other places, like we criticize China for eating cats and dogs, and we eat cows and goats.
Right.
No, we have to be very careful criticizing them. No, you're right. But we're a pretty arrogant lot
Oh, yeah.
on this side of the Atlantic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah,
saying that we're good in any way.
no, but I agree. No, I agree with you. But in terms of legislation, the EU, across the board. I know that and stuff. Let me just make a few more comments here, and maybe this will be stuff that you could talk to, especially the people who may disagree with you. So when I talk about rewilding, I'm talking about what I like to say is undoing the unwilding that begins in education. So one of the big things is working with kids. I do a lot of work with Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots program, and I do a lot of kids events, and I like to write kids books, although they're the hardest books to write in the world. They are. I can't even tell you how hard it is to get a kid's book done in any good form. But it really means rewilding education, and in the Rewilding Our Hearts, I have a chapter called Rewilding the Classroom. It's getting kids off their asses, getting them out. I was giving this talk and I said, just take their Apple computers away from them. I don't know, how many people in here had Apple computers when you're in first grade? The one good thing that came, though, at a Roots and Shoots class, this little girl ran up to me and she started asking me about a South American rodent. And I had never heard of the animal. So I said to her, where'd you hear about that? And she said, oh, on the web. So when I came back a few weeks later, I said, would you like to write a few paragraphs about this rodent about whom I've never heard? And she did. So there is good stuff there, but it's basically getting kids outside. But the other challenge, and I actually have a story in that book that I found really compelling, and there are people, some conservation psychologists, for example, are saying, look, part of their culture and part of their values is to walk around with their iPhone and their iPad and their this and their that. So we need to factor how they use instrumentation into their day. You know, story in there, like this guy takes his daughter out, 12-year-old daughter, into the woods to see a waterfall, and she's like sitting there going like this. If you wanted me to see a blipping waterfall, I could have seen it on my iPhone. Well, I don't like that, but the fact of the matter is that's how she saw the world. So I think we need to get the kids when they're really young. That's just my attitude. You got it really, really young. I mean, we know already that young kids, 3-month-old kids, are picking up facial expressions. By 15 months, they're displaying empathy. So we got to get them when they're really young, at times when we don't know what they're picking up. I mean, I don't remember what I was thinking when I was 15 months old.
To that, it's always interesting for me to see the little kids carrying around stuffed animals, because you know they care about animals. That's why they're carrying around those little stuffed animals. And I've heard it's at age 3 when they'll start learning bad habits towards animals.
Yes, I was just going to say, I mean, kids have a natural affinity to non-human animals, but they do go through a stage when they will, burn mice, ants, with a magnifying glass. I mean, they go through this stage, but it's not intentional harm. And that's what the really important thing is.
It's more curiosity.
It's more curiosity about the world. But still, I think we should be definitely educating kids, about the importance of nature and the importance of other animals. I think of rewilding as a personal venture. That's why I called it Rewilding Our Hearts, where we're basically making internal changes. You're watching other animals, not only watching them suffer, but watching them have pleasure, and you can actually feel the hormones and the nerves firing and playing off of that positive feeling that we get, that we all express. I had a bad day, I took a walk. My dog made me laugh. I was having the crappiest day of my life, and I saw some squirrels playing on a telephone pole or birds flying. Using those feelings internally to let the feelings then, if you will, motivate action and stuff. Getting little boys and males in general to be able to be sentimental and compassionate. Really, not being called sissies.
We used to take kids on river trips when they,
Great.
1 year, first year in school. They never went to the mall.
Really?
This
Are they okay?
Year after year, they had no interest in hanging out with the kids in the mall.
Do they still like you?
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm only
They
kidding.
just move on and start taking their kids.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is that. A lot of it is the atmosphere at home. My mother had been bitten by a dog, so I grew up with a goldfish. And I'm sorry I grew up with a goldfish. I'm sure that she or he was lonely and was beating his goldfish brain, out. How do I get out of this toilet of water or something? But I had a really compassionate mother, and really a sensitive mother. And so we were very pacifistic, we were anti-war, and I think I talk about this umbrella of compassion and empathy, and how compassion begets compassion, violence begets violence. All you have to do is read the news. Don't turn the news on. But violence begets violence, and compassion begets compassion. So what you did is icing on the cake in terms of.
Well, it was fun to watch.
It's really fun to watch. Yeah, I used to ask my parents when I was really young what animals were thinking and feeling when I was like 2 years old, and I wrote a book called Minding Animals, and that's exactly what I was doing. And I don't take any credit for it. At 3 years old, what was I thinking? But seeing animals be mistreated, like it was mostly dogs, getting hit or yelled at, just drove me crazy. I once yelled at a guy, and he went after my father.
One of the educational events we did was for a kindergarten class, and at one point, a teacher had to cut one of the children off when he asked us a question. He said, "Were these animals ever hit with baseball bats?" And we said, "No." And he said, "Well, because my parents and teachers said, let's just ask another question." And I'm just wondering what he was going to say. how was he going to finish that? You know?
Yeah.
My parents say it's wrong, or my parents hit my dog with
Yeah.
baseball bat, you know.
Yeah.
But that age,
The
the
teacher
teacher
was
cut him
there.
off. Yeah, the teacher said, let's ask a different question.
Teachers are required to report social services, anything that might be.
Well, I didn't
Well-
get involved in that. That was,
out, you know.
that wasn't.
That wasn't the point of, yeah.
But my point is, the kids, especially that age, some of the things they come up with, I mean, they're little sponges.
Mhm.
They absorb everything. We do
Mhm.
our tabling events, the little kids, we have interactive games with them, and they learn fast.
Yeah, it's imprinting. It's like
Yeah.
ducks following ducks. What you did is imprinting. People don't look at it that way, but it's how early experience really influences you later on, that you feel more comfortable with a lot of the experiences that you had when you were a youngster. I mean, that's basic biology, basic ethology. Let's see what. Oh yeah, let me just end off now with something, because I'd like your feedback on this, because everything's a work in progress. So in the Rewilding Our Hearts, I have what I call the 8 P's of rewilding, and they are being proactive, being positive, persistent, patient, peaceful, practical, powerful, and passionate. And right after the book was published, I mean, literally within a day, I went, oh God, I missed 2 important ones. So that's why I say everything's a work in progress. The last 2 were being playful and present. So being proactive means you can't just continue putting out fires. We just can't. So one way, of course, is to educate future generations who see the problems and aren't afraid to air them. I mean, I'm sure many people in here are proactive, but just the thing that really pisses me off, and some well-known people keep saying how resilient nature is. The rubber band is stretched. It's going to pop. It has popped. And I really had a big argument with somebody very well-known about their continually saying that nature is resilient. Nature is resilient in a very general way, okay? But it's only resilient to a certain point. So we're losing species at an unprecedented rate, and we're losing ecosystems, okay? So that's important. And the important thing, and it's not a bad thing, is we're not going to get back things that were. That's not bad. We're just moving on. Ecology or ecosystems are dynamic. So some ecosystems in 10 years could be as beautiful but different from what they were. So reintroducing wolves did not recreate the Yellowstone ecosystem. It's just, we do not recreate ecosystems. The ecosystem evolved without the wolves go back, and now we have a new beautiful ecosystem. And I've actually had people resent the use of that. They're going to say, oh yeah, we're just recreating the ecosystem that Yellowstone was in 1925. No, you're not. There weren't Winnebagos back then. I mean, there weren't. I mean, it's as simple as that, you know, and stuff. So I think we need to be very careful, but we still need to be proactive. In terms of being positive, I mean, negativity is I call it an energy and time bandit. I just don't want to hear anything negative anymore. It's just not worth it. We should concentrate on what works, not what doesn't work. And there's quite a number of things that are working. We just need to focus on them and stop the other things by showing how to the skeptics, if you will, that there are a lot working. Being persistent. I mean, really being persistent. I guess another P would have been being a pain in the butt. Just being persistent. I love it with kids. I love it when they'll just look at you and go, but why? But why? And you want to go, you know, why don't you go play outside? Go rewild. Being patient. I mean, we're not going to see things right away. We're not. If you need a gold star on your head every day, do something else. But we really need to be patient. And I really think that that's a real virtue. Being peaceful, being nice to people with whom you disagree. I mean, you know, I wish I'd known this years ago, and I'm sure many of us would. But the best thing to do is, when people disagree, is being very nice. And it's okay to get to a point and just say, let's just agree to disagree. I'm going to go talk to someone else. Because there are going to be people who are not going to change, just like you're not going to change. And that's the important thing. You're not going to change. You're not going to let anybody tell you that wolves aren't important. So if somebody wants to try to convince you that, they're going to get as frustrated as you are trying to convince somebody that, say, wolves are important. So that's okay to just say, thank you, and move on. Because these are just distractions. These are, a friend of mine calls them, they're intentional distractions. It's like I talk about animal emotions in dogs or cows or wolves or horses or mice, and people go, oh, what about mosquitoes? And my response is, well, I'm not talking about mosquitoes. I'm talking about these other animals. Because what they want to do is get you off track. So if you only have a finite amount of time and energy, you know, I always like have 5 fingers of time and energy, and if I put one finger into this and one finger into that, I have less to put into the really good stuff. It's okay to disagree, but it's called disarming. I took a course years ago in conflict resolution. It's disarming when you say to somebody who really wants to fight with you and argue is, oh, it's okay, you're entitled to your own view, but I really have nothing more to say. Another is like, some guy did some work in my house years ago, and part of it was good and part of it was bad. So when he came, I said, Tim, you know, the cabinets are beautiful, but the floor isn't really nice. That's called disarming. You give credit where credit's due. The cabinets were beautiful. The floor was a disaster. So it wasn't like he walked in and I said, Tim, your work sucks and the floor is bad. So, but those are really good strategies for talking with people, especially when you're trying to change them. Being practical. There's a real world out there. So I can have my vision of what I would like the world to be now or what I would like the world to become, but it's going to be slow and glacially slow. People don't like to be told what to do. So you have to set an example. And you just have to set the best example that you can. It's, you know, being powerful. Do a lot of work with young women and being powerful. The animal protection movement is probably 95%. I don't know what the percentage is, but it seems like it's 90% women. But a friend of mine, Joanne MacArthur, who did this wonderful book, We Animals, is editing a book called Unbound, and it's about the contribution of women historically and present day to the animal protection movement. She just told me that as of 2002, I believe that the movement was 70-something% women. So I think it's very important to empower young girls. You know, I mean, really important. And young boys, of course, but to show them that they can make a difference. I do a lot of work with Jane Goodall, and I think that that's a really good example of a woman who just went her own way and is hard to change. I'm saying that positively. Being passionate. I always tell people, find what you're passionate about. I hope it's not passionate about harm, but I mean it in a positive way, and just go for it. Just don't take no. I worked with this girl just this past year in Denver. She's a junior in some really high-end high school there, and she's going to graduate early, and she contacted me about, she wanted to do her senior thesis, high school, not college, on legal rights for great apes. I said, how old are you? No, I mean, seriously, she was 17 years old, and she graduated early. She was just passionate about it. I met with her and her mom, and her mom was kind of sitting there, not quite rolling her eyes. I mean, she supported her daughter, but she said, you know, I'm just trying to tell her that this is just not really important. And I said, it's important to her. Right. I mean, her mom was really a nice woman. It's just, she just didn't see it. By the end of the project, in April, her mother was a convert. Because this girl was really hard, really. Sometimes I talk to her and I go, oh God, would you like to run for president? Oh, you're too young. And then being playful. And this comes up because there's this phenomenon called secondary trauma, burnout. And a lot of people who work with human beings, caregivers, burn out. A lot of people in the environmental and the animal movement burn out. So one thing I learned from my father was that you need to be playful. Some of my mother's last words before she passed away was, be sure you play a lot. And I think what she really meant was, walk away from your brain. Get away from it all. And I do. I love to ride my bike. I love to stir single malt scotch with Twizzlers. No, I do. And I love to watch crappy movies and read crappy books. I mean, I read good books too, because I have to read to write. But I always say I like to read books where you could read the even pages and not miss a beat. I was watching Terminator a few nights ago, which I actually think is a phenomenally good movie, but you know, you can miss a beat here and there. But really what my friend Bruce Gottlieb says, he's a psychologist, says is you walk away from your brain. So this really became pertinent. I actually just did an interview with a woman who's writing a book on the secondary career trauma of especially people who work in hospice, for example. You can understand why they just burn out. My sister is a professional musician and she does a lot of hospice musical work. And I think she's always teetering. I mean, literally. You know, I said, you used to be a happy-lucky woman. And I mean, you know, we say it lightly, and she just spends her day or a chunk of days playing music for people who are going to die. So getting away from it all and finding out how you refuel. You can't run, you fill your car with gas, right? So you got to fill yourself up with energy. Because this stuff is really, this is trying, working for animal protection or working with, you know, humans in need. It's really trying. And being present is just being there, not being afraid to just give and being there. And that gets back to sort of, it gets, all these P's are mixed, are really interrelated. One night I was at a meeting and we were out drinking a lot of beer and we started playing the P game. Well, that sounds really weird, doesn't it? Well, we were playing the P game too, but I meant the letter P game. I have to remember that. But at the time that we were all at the table, we started flipping them around, and they're all really interrelated. And really what it comes down to is choose something you really love to do. I'm not going to use a P word. Just choose something you love to do and do it. And don't let other people, I mean, assuming it's good. I don't, you know, but I mean that really seriously. Choose something you like to do and just do it. Just go for it. Don't let people try to dissuade you, because in the end, you know, especially if you're a youngster, you got a long life ahead of you. You better choose something about which you're passionate and about which you're persistent and that you know, really, you know, deeply believe in. But you know, stop before you burn out. And I think that's really the thing. I know a number of people in the animal protection movement. I know a lot of people who have done amazing work with humans in need. And they burn out young, and they just can't do it. I mean, it's a disorder. They get their own form of PTSD in some ways. So let's see. Oh, I don't know. What do I have? Kids are ambassadors for the future. Oh, I'm just reading some notes here. Come on, ask me some more questions or give me some comments. If you're not, I'll finish. If you're not in, so this is a statement I love. If you're not in awe, you're not paying attention. We live in a magnificent world. We do. With all the crap going on, we live in a really special world. There's a lot of really good people. When people say to me, oh, well, you're working for animals, what about humans? There's a lot of people who are working for humans, and I always say, just pick the organism in which you're interested and work really hard for them. But, you know, there's lots of good people working for animals, non-human animals. There's lots of good people working with people. And I think the one thing that it always comes back to, and once again, sometimes people give me a little grief for this, but with all the work being done in conservation psychology, conservation social work, just different areas that show that we feel good when we do good things and we suffer the indignities when we harm other people or other animals. If someone tells me they're doing something good for the world, say good, I work with non-human animals. If someone says they're doing something good for non-human animals because it makes them feel good, good for them, because they're doing good for the animals. Some people will say, oh, but I wish they were motivated to help the animals. Well, so do I. But the opposite would be they do nothing, okay? But to me, it's all intermingled. It really is, that when we do good for non-humans, we're doing good for humans. And I'd like to think, you know, vice versa at some point.
I want to challenge the focus on the young kids. I mean, of course, I think it's wonderful, and there's a lot of great stories about it. But I've been, you know, hearing people talk about that, especially with the environment. It's too late for me, but let's see if we can train the next generation to do better.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we're the ones with the power to make changes.
Oh, I'm not, but I would never argue that it's too late for us. I'm thinking of the future.
I know, I'm not saying that, it's just that I've heard that as an excuse also, for people to.
Oh, I haven't, really?
Yeah.
Okay, no, I haven't actually. Yeah.
Especially with environmental stuff, like, it's the next generation that they're recycling as a second nature, and it's too late for us.
Oh, I see, right.
And I've seen that as a shifting of a shedding of responsibility.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I just think that we have to I guess I would say we have to focus on all groups, and kids oftentimes, get marginalized out. That's what I would say. No, I think we work with everyone. I mean, I used to teach this Roots and Shoots class at the Golden West. So one day I worked with 4-year-olds, and in the next hour I was working with a guy who was 100. And they had grandkids. I mean, your point is really well taken.
But and it's also that I've been hearing that same thing for the last 30 years that I've been involved in this.
Hearing.
It's too late for me, let's focus on.
Oh, see, yeah, it's funny, I haven't heard that. No, I mean, I just haven't.
Some people have their minds made up already.
Mhm.
Some people don't.
Yeah,
And those people that don't are still malleable.
yeah,
You can still help them to form a positive opinion. The thing I like about doing children as well as that, not doing children, but
Sure.
educating children as well as that, is because they are a blank palette.
hmm
They haven't really formed a solid opinion yet. They're open to learning about things. So I think it's important to do both. We need to talk to the people our generation, and maybe our kids' age, and then also our grandchildren's age, just to cover all of our bases.
Well, when I hear somebody say something you're saying, I haven't heard it very often, but you'll hear like comments. I gave a talk a couple of months ago, and somebody made a comment like that, and it wasn't like they were saying it was too late for them, but they were sort of dense to what was going on, just with non-human animals, with human animals, with the ecosystems, and I just said, do you have kids? Uh-huh. And it got really quiet, and I said, well, why would you have kids and not care about the future? It got really quiet, and I don't like being an ass, and I didn't mean it intentionally, but it was like, you have kids. Like, as things go, I mean, I know that things don't always go the way they go. They're going to be here long after you, and they're going to inherit a planet, either when you're not here or about which you don't have much input, for which you don't have much input. And I was thinking about that, and I started writing something about it. There needs to be there needs to be a way to say it nicely. But the point is, if you have kids and you don't work with them and make the world a better place, why have a kid? And that's the selfishness. I want a kid because I want a kid. Well, what about your kid? And so I agree with what you're saying there, because if you give up, then you're their model. I mean, like I said, I grew up in a home where animals weren't on the forefront, but they weren't dissed. You know what I mean? And there was this general, you be kind to animals, human and non-human. That was the message, and, so it had some effect on me. Yeah, there's lots of examples out there.
And what I've seen also is startling turnaround in people's attitudes when actually they become grandparents.
Yeah.
Is that suddenly what the world will be like in 100 years from now matters. To them, that they never occurred to them until they were grandparents.
One of the women at Golden West, and it was just coincidental, her granddaughter was running the Roots and Shoots group at Fairview High. It was just so cool because she was in her 80s. You could just tell she was a compassionate woman. She loved animals. She loved humans. She was just a really nice woman. And then all of a sudden I went in and she said, oh, my granddaughter, I think her name was Emily, you know her. She does the Roots and Shoots program at Boulder High, at Fairview High. And it made me really feel good. At least it was crossing generations and stuff. But when I would have them do drawings, I would have these kids do drawings. I have a dream that, fill in the blank. I am thankful for, fill in the blank. Jane Goodall and I actually did a book on this. Came from the Martin Luther King speech. It was amazing the parallel between the dreams and the things for which 90 and 5-year-olds were thankful for. and where the 90, the older, the grandparents really wanted the world to go. It was really, really very cool. So at least in that little cohort, there was hope and stuff. But and then people say it's hopeless. It isn't hopeless. I mean, if you think it's hopeless, it will be hopeless. I mean, that I guarantee you. I mean, if you think you can't do something, you ain't going to get it done, okay? But there's lots of really good people all over the world doing good things. There really are. I meet them a lot, and I mean, we're in the small minority. We're not, we're not in the majority, but there's a lot of people who are doing amazing things. I worked with these twin brothers in Tehran who wanted to have, were fighting against dissection, right? And so they let some lab animals free. I mean, besides arguing whether that was good, this is Iran, not Boulder, and they could have been killed by it, literally. So it was really amazing to work with these twin brothers. They had gerrymandered a satellite dish on the top of their apartment to get foreign foreign communication. So you meet people like that. Jill Robinson, who runs Animals Asia, where I do a lot of the bear rescue. I mean, she revolutionized, animal welfare, animal protection in China. It wasn't easy. So there's really, really good people doing things in places where you wouldn't think. There's a group called the All Africa Conservation Network. I think that's what it's called now, run by a guy named Josfat Ingano. So he's got teenagers going out and undoing traps and snares. Yeah, but they get killed. It's not like walking down the Pearl Street Mall and putting graffiti on a getting. Yeah.
I mean, but good for them.
No. What I'm saying is they're doing really good things. So anyway, there's hope.
Listen, you talk all night.
No, I'm falling
There
asleep.
will be
It's
coming
my
in here
it's
soon,
it's
so.
my bedtime. Well, if you got questions, fire them out.
I was
Yeah.
just, the comment you made, the wolves preempted the coyotes, are there any coyotes in Yellowstone?
Yeah. There's. I don't know. I honestly don't know what the situation is today, but the coyotes in Lamar Valley were basically decimated. Coyotes in Little America part of the park were not. I was up there, and I was actually with Doug Smith and Rick McIntyre, and we were watching wolves, and they kept going like this, shaking their head. And I turned around, and there was a coyote sitting 5 feet behind me, sitting on the ground, watching me, looking through a spotting scope, watching wolves. But in the Lamar Valley, they decimated 90% of the coyotes, and there had been 6 resident packs. One of my students was studying some of them, and a guy named Eric Giese from Utah State was studying them, and they were gone. So they weren't decimated throughout the park. And in all honesty, there's some ideas of why it happened. I don't know why. The wolves love Lamar Valley, as you know. I mean, they. That.
So there were carcasses found, or they just disappeared? Is it possible they were run off?
No,
Oh.
no, they were killed.
Okay.
Yeah, some were run off, but no, there were some real. Yeah, people observed some really horrific things. Yeah, but that's what I meant. Those are real questions, and it depends on your values, I suppose. It depends on where you're coming from. Some people think that's fine, and some people just said it was egregious.
So perhaps, rather than the reintroduction of foreign wolves, just protecting them and let them gradually
Disperse naturally.
Yes, that would be a better answer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think the natural movement would be really great, but you still have to change attitudes. I mean, you just do.
Yes, you do.
I mean, you got, and values. And I mean, I guess changing
Well,
attitudes and
we
values.
just lost 2. We just lost Echo,
Yes.
and we just lost 1 in Kremlin. So
Kremlin,
soon
I
we had
know,
2 dispersed
because they-
and 2 got shot.
Well, and the guy in Kremlin claimed he was a coyote
Yeah.
hunter,
He's
and he
following
thought
the-
the wolf was a coyote. Now, if you're a self-proclaimed coyote hunter, you think you'd know what a coyote looks like.
Well, that's because he's lying.
True of them.
I mean, he's,
He can get away with it.
That's true of the man that shot Echo. He was
Yeah, he said
also.
the same.
Same thing. They're both going under the
And
McKittrick
it's
policy.
because of the McKittrick
The same,
policy.
which is
All they
one of
have
our
to
big
do
things
is
we're going to
say,
fight to try to get that out
Oops.
off the books.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, when I was studying coyotes in Wyoming, I studied them for like 8 years in Grand Teton National Park. These ranchers up there know coyotes. I learned a lot from them. And a lot of them didn't mind coyotes. I can't say they would have their attitude about wolves. I don't know. There weren't wolves there then. But to say that some of these people can't tell the difference between a coyote and a wolf is just a lot of crap.
Actually, one of the problems is they shoot at them from such a long distance.
Yeah.
From such a far range. You can't infer whether it's wolf.
Mhm.
Actually,
Well,
it's
they have a
this
scope.
guy's father's.
But that's the other whole thing. Why is it okay to kill
But
coyotes?
Well, no, it's not.
Yeah, it should be okay anyway.
No.
Killing coyotes.
It's okay to kill coyotes because there's lots of them. That's the numbers game.
Yeah, that's the numbers game.
Right.
But in reality, they have a place in the ecology just as much as anything else. So we shouldn't be saying it's okay to kill a coyote.
No, we're not. I mean, we're kind of saying it generically. Okay, go change the world.
Thank you all for coming. It's always a rush trying to get out, but Mark, thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.
Oh.
It was wonderful. Hope to-